Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable Minister, Your Excellencies, I'm honored to be the country rapporteur for the Republic of Korea and to welcome the high-level delegation of the Republic to the 88th session of the CEDAW Committee. This is indeed an inflection point in the history of the Republic of Korea and the world. We are at the cusp of a digital revolution led in part by the Republic of Korea. Just last month, South Korea held its 22nd general election. The election opens a new window of opportunity to rise to new heights of global leadership. Unlocking women's full and equal participation in the political economy and the digital economy can only spur the Republic of Korea's growth as a global power. On a deeply personal note, I was proud to be invited as the keynote speaker to the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Republic of Korea's Constitutional Court in August of 2023. In fact, you have an ancient history of constitutionalism dating back from the Chosun dynasty. The Constitution's Article 6 enshrines that international treaties, including the CEDAW, shall have the same force and effect of law as domestic laws of the Republic of Korea. Under this constitutional provision, the CEDAW is directly applicable by the Constitutional Court. I note that the Korean Constitutional Court frequently is in line with the CEDAW. In fact, I have perused the entirety of the Constitutional Court's jurisprudence. I highlight two cases. The Constitutional Court invalidated the Hoju system or male head of household system. But I note that the Civil Act, Article 78(1), still requires children to use their father's family name. What is the status of the bill that has been introduced to amend the law? Would you also consider removing the reservation on Article 16(1)(g) of the CEDAW on the right to choose a family name? I go on to the second case. The criminalization of abortion was ruled unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court in April of 2019. However, the state party has yet to make substantial changes that would allow for safe abortion access and the coverage of abortion by the National Health Insurance. Furthermore, as you know, Your Excellencies, there are a plethora of bills proposed in relation to the court's ruling. What is the status of these bills, these pending bills? I go on to anti-discrimination, which is the bedrock of the CEDAW, which embodies formal and substantive equality and outlaws both direct and indirect discrimination. The Republic of Korea has a strong anti-discrimination provision in Article 11 of the Constitution. Yet, as you know, there is a striking absence of an anti-discrimination law that prohibits both de jure and de facto discrimination. Article 11 of the Constitution states that there shall be no discrimination in political, economic, social, or cultural life on account of sex, religion, or social status. When will the Republic draft an intersectional anti-discrimination law that will realize the full promise of the Republic of Korea's Constitution? I will highlight a few key de jure discriminatory provisions. As was mentioned by the Human Rights Commission, the national machinery for women is foundational to the rule of law. Would you consider rescinding the proposed law to revise the Government Organization Act to dismantle the Gender Equality Ministry? I understand, in conversation with Your Excellencies, that there are deliberations to integrate the Gender Ministry with the Ministry of Social Welfare as a way of expanding its scope. We would like more information on that. I go on to the criminal justice reform. Despite calls for change, Article 297 of the Criminal Act still requires violence or intimidation for a rape conviction. Will you adopt the proposals to redefine rape law and to include affirmative consent, such as free and voluntary consent, in the rape law? As the law stands, victims of sexual harassment might be doubly victimized as they are threatened with penalties for so-called false accusations of sexual abuse. This has not only stoked gender wars, but can erode women's access to justice. I go on to now what I call the de jure forms of equality that are key to the CEDAW's full actualization in the Republic of Korea. Anti-feminist rhetoric seems to have sparked a popular narrative weaponizing feminism, which is in turn spawning a harmful youth cultural moment on reverse feminism, which also threatens to reverse prior gains and engender anti-feminist hate speech both online and offline. In fact, this rhetoric has spilled over into lawmaking. The Seoul Guidelines on Maternity in 2019, as you well know, called for pregnant women to cook meals for their husbands for up to 3 days before going to hospital. How can we create a more gender-equal national narrative? How can you revise harmful narratives with positive rhetoric, both on the CEDAW and on feminism? How can you interpret Article 36 of the Constitution on the protection of motherhood to include shared rights of parenting? How can you shift national narrative arc towards gender justice? I go on finally to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. The Republic of Korea's third National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security has as its main focus sexual violence. However, the 1325 agenda and the General Recommendation 30 of the CEDAW Committee are much broader than just conflict-related sexual violence. It calls for leadership of women in national, regional, and global security. Given the growing spectrum of security challenges and increasing proliferation of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles in the region, how are women involved in security in counter-missile strategy? As the shadow of nuclear weapons becomes a force multiplier geopolitically and the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons is at stake, how are women engaged in the NPT treaty? On November 23rd, the Seoul High Court issued a landmark decision redefining the theory of customary international law and ruled on reparations for each of the 16 so-called comfort women. This is indeed a landmark case, both for South Korea and for the world. But South Korea too has obligations by the comfort women. The budget to support the victims of sexual slavery must be included within the National Action Plan. My question also pertains to the revision of textbooks curricula and to memorializing the accurate narrative arc, both historic and current, regarding the situation of comfort women. The history of sexual slavery is part of a painful global reckoning. At the same time, your educational system, Your Excellencies, is a revered educational system. How can you use the educational system as a way to addressing this painful history in the world? What is the State Party's concrete plan to pass the bill on protection support and commemorative projects for the victims of military sexual slavery? And finally, Excellencies, in October 2022, the Supreme Court ruled on reparations for the US military camp town comfort women. What is the status of the implementation of the court decision? I look forward to a constructive dialogue with the distinguished delegation, as well as a conversation that will spur the growth of the Republic of Korea as a model for the rest of the world. Thank you. Honorable Minister, I agree with you that not every OECD country hosts a gender equality ministry, but I want you to consider that the Republic of Korea's gender equality ministry has been historically a driver of change in many directions. While you may consider how you might reorganize it to be more effective, I would also like you to consider maybe rescinding the bill that is already registered in Parliament. While you do so, I want to shine a quick spotlight on the national human rights machinery. How do you ensure the National Human Rights Commission's independence under the Paris Principles? The three major principles are pluralism, independence, and effectiveness. We already know that it's plural and it's effective. I would like more information on its independence. Thank you.
country rapporteur, Mr. Silva, for 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, my question builds on Madam Bandana Rana's question on technology-facilitated gender-based violence, but it goes beyond the domestic region to the transnational, cross-border and extraterritorial obligations of the state party. The Republic of Korea is the world's leading producer of memory chips, and therefore issues such as digital sex crimes remain a significant concern not only within the borders of the Republic of Korea, but outside. We see that 98% of deep fake videos online are pornographic, and that 99% of those targeted are women and girls, both in the Republic of Korea and outside. You have model laws on digital privacy, and those privacy laws were enacted even before the European Union's privacy laws. But how do you measure the implementation of these laws, both within the Republic of Korea and outside of its borders, and how many cases sexual harassment issues within the Republic of Korea, and how do you address the cyber sex trafficking through the Telegraph Act, which shocked the conscience of a nation, and how do you make sure that it doesn't have a spillover effect on other countries that you function in, given the fact that you're a leader in technology? On Madam Shia's question on the role of education and academic institutions, Your Excellencies, given the explosion of AI-driven deepfake, revenge porn, spy cam videos, and synthetic media pornography, especially in educational institutions, both in the Republic of Korea and around the world, what educational programs are you developing to address AI-driven gender-based violence among youth specifically? And how are you alerting tech companies to mitigate the gendered harms and biases? The ninth room case in the RoK sent shockwaves on the use of the Telegraph app to lure young girls into cyber sex. On a related issue, given the rising anti-feminist sentiments which have sparked the populist narrative weaponizing feminism, which in turn is spawning a harmful youth cultural movement on reverse feminism, which threatens to reverse both prior gains and engender anti-feminist hate speech online, how can educational institutions address this in ways that can challenge the root causes of gender wars and create alternative discourses on gender equality and the ways in which we can reconcile the rights of all? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable Minister, Your Excellencies, I start with the cross-cutting existential challenge under the auspices of CEDAW's Article 14 and General Recommendation 37 and SDG 13, climate change. Just a few weeks ago, Your Excellencies, in Woodpecker et al. Versus South Korea, on April of this year, South Korea's Constitutional Court began historic hearings that called upon the state for the protection of dozens of young climate change activists. The plaintiffs argued that the state party must more effectively tackle climate change and protect the future generations' human rights, especially the young human rights activists, including children and a 17-month-old baby Woodpecker, the youngest plaintiff, who was a fetus at the time of the filing of this case in 2020. While there are other cases in progress elsewhere in Asia, this is the first case in Asia to have a public hearing involving children, a baby, and the next generation impacted by climate change. So that takes me to the Republic of Korea's UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai and the ways in which you backed an ambitious vision which called upon our land, shared future towards balanced, smart and innovative cities and regions for all. And the new plan put into priority several conditions, and I just picked three. One, building safe and livable places for all generations. Two, creating quality and eco-friendly spaces. And three, bringing peace to the national territory and connect the continent with the ocean, including both the SDG 16 and the SDG goal on the ocean. So what I would like to do now is, given the backdrop of what is unfolding in Korea before the Constitutional Court and your commitments before COP28, please provide us with the plan for engaging women and girls who are the most affected by climate change in Korea, and how you would mitigate climate change impact on rural women, how you would engage women, especially rural women, in climate change plans. That brings me to the important role of rural women under Article 14. Now, under Article 1192 of the Korean Constitution, you have a model provision which enshrines these statements. The state may regulate and coordinate economic affairs in order to maintain the balanced growth and stability of the national economy, to ensure proper distribution of income, to prevent the domination of the market and the abuse of economic power, and to democratize the national economy. This is, in fact, a model provision. I have not, in my study of comparative constitutions, come across a provision that calls for the democratizing of a national economy and the prevention of the domination of the market over people. So in other words, under this constitutional provision, how will the RoK create a redistribution of the economic resources in the pursuit of democratizing the economy? Especially, how will rural women, women migrant workers, women with disabilities benefit under this provision of the Constitution? You spoke, Your Excellency, on the important role of bilateral cooperation in trade relations. Are rural women in agriculture and in offshore fisheries, in aquaculture and inland fisheries, also part of this important bilateral cooperation and trade relations? You also spoke of the role of female founders and the role of the government in feminist financing, especially given the fact that female founders are the engine of growth in the RoK. But I would like us to bring a focus on rural women and rural women female founders. What are the benefits that you have for rural women female founders? South Korea's Labor Standards Act provides protection to all of the country's workers, citizens and foreigners alike. However, Article 63 of the Act does not include the agricultural industry. A sector, according to the IOM, is made up of over 70% migrant workers. Will you consider rectifying this gap? Last month, the government drafted the Special Act on improving the quality of life of farmers and fishermen and promoting development of rural areas. Would you consider including fisherwomen as part of improving the quality of life of farmers and fisherwomen? And under Chapter 3, Article 18, include rural women. And how would you provide that assistance to rural women who include fisherwomen and farmers? As you know, Your Excellency, migrant workers experience poor working conditions and are subject to physical or sexual violence. What provisions, what plans of action are available for migrant workers in the rural areas? Your Excellencies, Honorable Minister, the Republic of Korea is a powerhouse in technology. How would you address and employ technology, especially assistive technologies for women with disabilities, under both the CRPD and the CEDAW's Article 14? Would the State Party consider new and improved protections for the elderly, using your resources and harnessing the power of technology to protect both the elderly and women with disabilities? Right now, the Supreme Court is hearing a case on insurance coverage for same-sex partners. The decision is pending. In this atmosphere of a pending decision, what steps would the Republic of Korea take to address the Supreme Court's positive decision regarding same-sex partners and insurance coverage? And finally, Your Excellencies, distinguished Minister, how has the State Party adopted gender-sensitive policies in women's detention centers in keeping with the Bangkok rules on women offenders and prisoners and the treatment of women prisoners under the Nelson Mandela rules? Thank you.